All right, today I want to go over a couple more methods of how to animate your text. I'll kind of show this class another 2 methods. Next class I'll show another 2 methods. And then we'll have another class of just working on these. Remember, explore different things. It's not just about doing the assignments, it's about pushing yourself to get some nice portfolio pieces. If you made 10 of these, you might use 2 of them, right? So if you make 5, maybe you'll use 1. So the more pieces you have for your actual portfolio, the better off you'll be when you get to portfolio time. This is where I left off last time, animating the chunks kind of blowing away like this. I said I would show different ways that you can create these divisions in here. Let's see, that is my plane. Oops. There's my other one. Here's the Voronoi one, which I will name Voronoi. Keep everything organized. So on the Voronoi itself, there's a sources area. This is where before I clicked on that and I chose the number of points. Now obviously the more points we have, the less points we have, the less pieces we'll have. And so we'll get more of like a chunkier kind of result. If I have just 1, and again, depending on what you're trying to do, you may have a use for something like that, okay? Now there's other ways that we can do this. So right now it's set to uniform, which basically means, I don't know if I can pull this out. You guys can see that, yeah. Basically this is where we can choose different things. So if we set this to normal, we get different values here that we can adjust. So you see standard deviation, tweaking that. Oh, I only have 2 points, that's why. Okay, and you'll see here the idea with the way that Voronoi works is it creates a clustering of points, and then those points are used to create the shapes. 3D has no actual way to understand, like, where should I break something, so we have to give it a reason or give it a method to do that. So if you look here, or not there, if you look here, you'll see these points that are right there. Where these 2 points like kind of meet in the center, that's where it's creating those. So the more points we have, the more pieces we'll have. Also, the way that the points are laid out will dictate the kind of surface we have. If all the points are in the middle, then all the breakup will happen in the middle, and then the outside will just be like shards of pieces, okay? Something like this, you'll see there's a concentration of points here and here, but then way out there, there's very little points. And so you get these like big chunks, but you also get these small pieces. Depending on what you're trying to go after, you may want something like that. So right now with this standard deviation set to a really low number, you can see we have a lot of small pieces right in the middle, but a lot of big chunks on the outside. Let's make this 100. There we go. So again, really small pieces right there. And then I can say create points per object. This will focus points just on these main objects here. For some reason the C didn't get anything. I can set this to high quality, which will change the way that it's adding the points. So it's instead of just kind of like randomly putting them there, it's more looking at the surface and figuring out a better way to do it. Just by me clicking that, you can see down here, this is now taking a bit longer to do. Okay, so I'm going to turn off high quality. I don't need that. I can also turn off inside if I just want the outside to be shattered. You don't have to know fully what every single one of these features do. All you have to know is enough is to get to the point where by clicking on them or adjusting values, you see the change, and then you kind of move it towards what you want to get from there, okay? So by me clicking on inside off, you'll see that we get more shattering on the outside of this, and the inside of it isn't being broken up. Before, what was happening is there might have been several particles on the inside of a surface that it was like breaking up into little chunks in there. Now everything is on the outside, okay? Another way I could do this is inverse normal. Again, you get more numbers. If you look at where this is at, you can see where the points are coming from, right? That's what the orange things are. So way up here, we're getting a lot of streaks. As I bring this down, we're getting a lot more pieces like that. And if we go really far, it'll be, you know, pretty much just laid out pretty evenly. Here is exponential. Now in this, watch as I adjust this. Look where the points are at, and as I streak them across, see how they're adjusting. Now, if we look down there below that, you'll see where it says X, Y, and Z. If I turn X off, it just goes everywhere. If I turn Y on, you'll see the points are now at the bottom of this. So now as this animates, you'll see more like strips of points, like slivers basically, versus the big chunky kind of pieces. Okay, and then if I take this standard deviation, maybe up a little bit like that, maybe take the point count down. There we go. Now I'll get these like big shards. Okay, so that's another way that we can kind of tweak what the end result is. It's not just about adding Voronoi and doing it. If you look online, you watch any tutorials where they do breaking up text like this, it's very obvious if someone uses the same effect over and over and over again. Just this semester, there was a cool After Effects tutorial someone released where there's like this glitchy text type effect, okay? It like has this lightning bolt type effect to it. It's really cool. So far, I've seen 3 people do it and turn it in. It's not wonderful. It's not yours. But you people will notice that stuff, okay? So that's one way that we can tweak this, by going into this point distributor and changing this thing, which will choose how the points are distributed, and then change that. We can also turn off the points if we don't want to see them. We can uncheck this. What that does is just gets rid of the point distribution altogether. So now we just have 4 pieces basically. Okay. If I go into here, I can say add a distribution source and add another point generator. So I might have one point generator that's, vertical pieces that are like slivers, and another one that kind of breaks up those slivers a little bit more. So I may have different ways I break things up. I'm just going to delete that one, so I just remove it. I could also add a shader source. And if I click on the shader source, this allows me to add a material to this, or a texture. That texture will then drive where the points are at, and then the points will then drive how the Voronoi gets shattered. Okay? So if I go to my shader here and I just say, let's add a gradient. And I'm going to set that to surface. There we go. And I'm trying to zoom in, but my camera's locked, so I'm just going to unlock my camera so I can zoom in and see this. So what this is doing is it's giving more points around these edges and less points towards that other area here, okay? Based off of the black and white values of this. If I were to swap them, then we would see more points on one side than the other side, okay? So now we have more points on this side, less points on the other side, so again, it's going to shatter differently. Think of like a pane of glass. You have, basically it comes from the center out. If you were to smash the center of a glass, you have a lot of breaking up in the middle, but then further out it would have less points, right? So we might have something like that where we would use a circular ramp. In this case it doesn't really work, but we'd have a circular ramp that would allow us to have more points in the center, less points on the outside, okay? We could also, let me just go to this. I'm going to go to noise. Click on the noise here. And this gives me even more options of how to play with what kind of noise structure I'm dealing with in order to, again, create different points. Different points make different Voronoi. Okay, so now I have a lot of points in there, and then this creates, a kind of neat effect again. Now it's kind of boring to do the same kind of thing. So with this case, we're still doing kind of like the floating away. What if I want to take a word, keep the word there, but then just break the word, right? Let's say I just want it to fall apart. So I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to take this other one, I'm going to put it on a layer. And that one will be called Voronoi animated with a plane. That way I know exactly what that's called, and I'll assign everything to it so everything gets into that layer. I hide it, I don't render it. Okay. So in my new one, I'm just going to delete the plane and the random. So now I basically have no animation on this. It's just my MACA all broken up. I have big chunks on the outside, and then in some areas I have these little pieces. And again, I could add more pieces as I go along. For any kind of testing I do, because of how this is set up, I typically like to keep things as little as possible, right? So if I set this to 5, that gives me a good idea of how the pieces are going to move, and all I have to do is add more pieces to this later, and I'll get more pieces falling, or whatever I do. One of the benefits of this Cinema is our ability to literally create that Voronoi and have it function. Maya, which is like a software that's used countless movies, like pretty much every movie in the last 10 years has used Maya at some point. Maya cannot do this. They would typically go outside of Maya into another program called Houdini, do it there, and then bring that data back in here. Cinema didn't have this feature until either this version or the version before it. So this is like awesome stuff. So it's really exciting. All right, so I'm going to go to my Voronoi here. I'm going to go to my tags. I'm going to go to simulation, and I'm going to say rigid body. So now what should happen when I hit play, because it's a rigid body, it's going to interact with gravity. It's going to fall straight down. There it goes. Okay. I need a ground to collide with, so I'm going to click on my floor, go to tags, go to simulation, and say collider body. And now I rewind again, I hit play, and it just falls apart. Watch this one piece. I don't know if you guys can see it. There's one piece that kind of bounces across. There it goes. It's like right over here. There it is. That piece there. So dynamics is dynamic. We don't set any keyframes. We can set them to kind of trigger things, but for the most part, we're just kind of saying, make this dynamic, make it fall with gravity or interact with other items in the scene. So if I click on the fracture here on the right side, there's where that dynamic is. This is where I can go through and tweak any of the settings. So some things that may affect it are density. So if something were to collide with it and hit it, that might cause it to break, and that would affect, one item is really heavy, one item is really light. That would affect how those two items interact with each other, okay? If this is a brick wall and I throw a little bouncing ball at it, it's not going to do anything. But if it's a Lego wall and I throw a bowling ball at it, it's going to do a lot, okay? The software can obviously dictate what that is. There are some forces here. We don't need to worry about that so much. I don't want that. We're not dealing with soft bodies. All right, so I'm going to go to the collision area, and I'm going to set my bounce to 0, okay? That little piece that was bouncing across, it's because it's dynamic, and so it's bouncing with the other surfaces. I'm going to play it. Okay, that's better. I don't like how the M is just staying up like that. That's kind of weird, but we'll fix that. I also don't like how much it's sliding, so it's kind of weird how much it's actually like sliding across the floor. So I have two things. One of them is the text is dynamic, but the floor is also dynamic, but it's set to just be a colliding object. So if I go to the floor and I go to its dynamic properties, I could again set its bounce to 0, and now hit play. We get a little bit less sliding than we did before, maybe not so much. I'm going to take the friction up on the floor. There we go. Definitely not as much. And now that we see more of the M, it actually looks kind of neat how it's doing that. Cool. What else can we play with here? Let's go back to that. So we can make the friction on this higher. The friction here is the friction for the objects interacting with each other, right? So as those pieces are there, if there's no friction, they'll just slide away from each other. If there's a lot of friction, they might slowly move, and then once they separate, then they're actually going to fall. So again, we'll kind of see a little bit different animation than we did a second ago. And a lot of this will depend on just where the pieces are, how it's feeling, you know, everything. If I take my Voronoi and I move it below the ground, watch what happens here. You can see it right at the beginning, right? Boop. Yeah, it bounces up. Because it's colliding, it recognizes, hey, I'm actually on the other side of this. I need to go back up to the top. The same thing if I were just to take the Voronoi and make it really high up. I may make it like this high, let's say. Hit play. We'll get different results again. If I take it up that high and I rotate it, again, we'll get different results, okay? So there's a lot of stuff that we can do just based off of this kind of thing, changing the position, changing how many pieces there are, changing the friction or the bounce. All of those things will go into playing how it's going to turn out. Now, no dynamic system is 100% perfect. If you've ever seen the movie Nemo, they have this part where there's a bunch of fish caught in this net, okay? All those fish moving around are dynamic. Sometimes they would get it where one of the fish that's in the net would suddenly just pop out of the net. There's a lot of stuff calculating, and it's not perfect, so they would just like pop out. And then what the animators would do is they would let it pop out, and then they would just delete it afterwards because they have fancier stuff than we have. So our fix for anything that looks odd is just to start changing some settings and then working with it like that. So if we don't like how much, like there's a piece that just like flew off screen. Let me see if I can find it again. Nope, there it is. That piece right there. So that guy flies like really far compared to everything else. It seems odd. I may not like that. So some stuff that I could do is literally just do this. That much rotation, just barely a little bit, may correct that thing flying off so far. So now I rewind it, I play again. It feels better. I may want to adjust it further. As we're playing with dynamic stuff, you'll notice that I'm never clicking and dragging this in the timeline. Dynamics have to be calculated from frame 1 or 0 to frame 2 to frame 3 and so on. We can't just click and drag because you'll see that it's trying to calculate it. Every time I go forward, it's calculating. Every time I go backwards, it's like frozen in space. So always click the rewind button, then hit the play button, and let it do its thing. Okay? I'm going to go back to my Voronoi. I'm going to add maybe 10 points, maybe 20. Okay? And again, we'll get different results. Notice how it's going slower? Because I've added so many points, it's taking longer to calculate each one of these pieces moving down, and is it colliding with stuff, and when it does collide, where does it move to, and all that. So the more points you have, the slower it's going to go. Okay, I actually don't want this to be rotated. Coordinates, 0, 0. I think having it fall into frame would be kind of a neat effect. It'll be kind of like, I can just jump to my camera, I guess. It'll be down here, and then it'll just fall. When you do dynamics, you have to do the sound effects also, otherwise it looks stupid. Go back to this. Back to this one. Yep, I'm going to take the ground friction up to 100. There we go. Now, if I hit Control D, this will bring up my project settings. Under Dynamics, I have more settings here that I could adjust. So, how big is our scene? Is our scene as big as a house, or is it as big as my desk here? Okay, there's no indicator as to how big something is. So when I hit the play button, it's just kind of simulating based off of the units I've already created. But let's say that I wanted this to maybe go faster or slower. If I take my time scale and I bump this up to, let's say, 200, then I hit play, this is going to fall down twice as fast because it's 200%. Let's hit play again. All right, so by 15, it's in the scene. By 16, it's hit the ground. And by 17, it's broken. Okay, so now let's go up to 10%. And we'll hit play. We've passed 17. We've passed 60. Right? It's still sitting up there. It's barely moved. But this might be a cool effect, right? So if this thing is falling down, and I have a lot more frames of it falling, I can create some really cool slow motion effects. Think of the Matrix, right? Where the something would fall, and then we would do like bullet time where it freezes, and we can kind of do like a wraparound of it. That's stuff that you can do. 10% is obviously way too slow. It's a lot of frames I'm not seeing here. Let's try 50% and just see how fast that falls. Keep in mind, too, it will pick up speed as it goes. There we go. There's not a whole lot of bullet time stuff we would do here because there's not many like explosive pieces. Okay, now let me reset it so that the Voronoi is actually back on the ground. And I'm just going to go underneath. I watch it dip through the ground and then pull it back up. Hit play, make sure there's no jumping. Nope, there's a little bit of a fall, so maybe I want to scoot it down just a little bit more. Still good. There's a little jump. All right, that's good there. Okay. So now I'm going to jump back to my Voronoi dynamics here. And under dynamics, I'm going to choose when it's triggered. So right now it's being triggered immediately. I hit the play button. All the pieces are already recognized as being loose and they just fall down. Okay. If I choose on collision, what this means is that it'll stay exactly where it's at until something collides with it, and then it will break. So if I rewind, hit play, it stays still. So now I get to drop something on it. So I'm going to drop, I'll just drop a sphere. Make that smaller. Okay. So I'm going to have the sphere actually move across the screen. I'll set some position keyframes here. I'll go up to 40. I will scoot this across. Set that. Okay, so now there's no collision happening. It's going right through it because it's not part of our dynamic system. Everything is dynamic. We have to say this is dynamic, this is dynamic, this is dynamic. Otherwise, it would take forever to calculate anything. So I'm going to go under my simulation tag, make this a colliding body. So now when we hit play, now that might be more like, you know, bullet time, freezing the frame and kind of going around it type stuff. But you'll notice the second that it hits the letter, that it actually just like starts breaking it. Now this could be a, let me scoot this up a little bit more. Oops. I'm going to go a little bit up here, like that, and then scoot this up some. Okay, so it should hit the top of the M. So you'll notice that in the A, it doesn't actually interact with the A at the bottom. Okay, all of the pieces are considered separate pieces. So it has to interact with that piece or have something interact with it. So when it hits the top starts falling, hits the bottom starts falling, hits the next area. And that's how we get this like nice thing. If it just hit it, then everything just fell apart. That would look weird. But this, I think that looks pretty sweet. I'm going to go to maybe here. You can see I can jump, but if I'm modifying something, and I'm just going to animate it up there. So we should get something that kind of goes above the A and the C. Maybe it hits the tip of the A. We'll see. Yep. There we go. And now you can see how some of the pieces are, you know, bouncing around. Now you might get something like this that happens. Nothing touched those top pieces. So those top pieces are still not dynamic. So they're just kind of like sitting out there waiting. So it's just something you have to be aware of. It might happen. And then you have to go through and make sure that obviously something hits it. So I wouldn't put that there, obviously. I'd make sure that it hits it so that we don't get anything weird like that. You can, yep. Let's delete the keyframes here. Animation, delete track. Now I go right there. Let's go 240. Right. It sort of kind of works, right? So what happens here is that it goes through and hits them. As it goes through, it's pushing some of them up. Those push other ones up, those push other ones up. It just didn't hit the back of that A. Okay, it hit this one, which is weird, but didn't hit that one. So I could do multiple things. One thing I could do is change my points. If I have more points, maybe I'll get a piece there, and that piece will hit the next one and hit the next one. So again, you kind of go through and you just play with stuff. Sources, points. Let me make this, let's say, 30 points. Nope, it hit the A, but it didn't hit the C now. Okay. Maybe instead of adding more points, I'll lower the points. Maybe I'll have 10 points. Maybe I'll change the seed here, which randomizes where the points are at, and then hit play. Maybe I'll change the position of the ball. There you go, that one worked. Okay, so less points. Changing the seed, that seemed to function. I don't like that spinning one. That one's going crazy. Now he's not. It was before. Cool. So again, stuff to play with. Show all use points. Yes. What else can we do? Under detailing, so if I hit play, we'll look at this and see. Let me jump out of my camera, which I am out. If we look at the amount of shapes here, this is a pretty smooth cut, right? So it basically broke it off and there's a chunk that flies away. Let me lower the amount of points before I do this any further because I know this is going to take some processing power. So I'm going to say 1. That should be sufficient. Yep. Sort of breaks them. It's still there, but good enough for what I'm going to show. So under detailing, if I turn this on, what it's going to do is it's going to add more definition to those breaks. So instead of them being just like flat chunks, now they're actually going to have like pieces on there. Okay, so I rewind this again. Looks nice and smooth. I hit play. And now we get more of a chunk piece instead of it being just perfectly flat. There's also inside here, detailing, yes, maximum edge length that I could adjust. There's also turbulence. Let's take the noise strength up to 50 or 100. There we go. And now we're really starting to get some jagged pieces on this. Now, as I rewind this, I have to make sure that it still looks like it's all one piece here. On the A, you can see something's kind of poking through. So I need to adjust that. Voronoi, 50, nope, too much. 40, yeah, maybe 35 or, but it really wants to be like 25 or 20, holy cow. Yep. Now also keep in mind that it may not matter. If I don't see it, something's jutting out from the back, who cares? I don't see that part. I'll let it play without it. So there we go again. Now, because I've complicated this, I have more detail, more points, it's going to go slower. But the results of that are going to be a little bit more interesting to look at versus the boringer stuff. And then once I go back to my sources and once I start adding more points in here, save first. Always save when you start messing with this kind of stuff. It has like this butterfly effect. As you edit one thing, it's editing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and it might freeze. It didn't freeze, good. Now I hit play, it's going really slow. There we go. And so now we have chunks with a little bit more detail to them. Detailing, yes. That's fine there. I don't need to colorize the fragments, I guess I can leave that. And then obviously I could play with some of these other settings, changing the global scale, make it smaller, changing the kind of turbulence that we have here, we'll adjust that. I can change the edge length. I'll set it to 2 and we'll hope. There it goes calculating down here. There we go. Now it's going really slow. Because there's a lot more divisions on this. If I turn the lines back on, you can see how detailed those pieces are. Okay, so I'm going to turn that and detailing off for now. It's just too much stuff going on. Some of those, if you know you're going to do them, you keep it off. When you're ready to render, turn it on and then let it go. You're walking away from it anyway. We can also do connectors, geometry glue, which is cool. So if I enable this, what it will do is it'll actually go through and connect pieces together. So now when I hit play, oops, did I not add one, fall off? Cluster, sorry, there we go. When I set that to cluster and then I play this, it basically takes the pieces that were there, they were already broken up, and it puts them together. So you might divide this entire thing up and everything is nice and evenly spaced. So let's do that. I'm going to go back to my points and just remove the shader and just add a distribution source. Let's make 100 points uniformly spaced without any geometry glue. Okay, so now for the most part, all these pieces are pretty close to the same size. With that geometry glue, it allows me to say, if you have so many pieces by each other, just connect them, just make it one piece. So if I set this to 1, you see we get that. If I set it to 20, we get this. So now I have some small pieces and I have some big pieces. And now what's neat about this is that we'll also get, again, more edge detail, so that as the pieces break, it's actually breaking off into these more chunks. And then if I went into my detailing and I added that, it would add even more detail to this, okay? If you look at any of the movies where they do breaking things, it's a lot of stuff that goes into making it look good. There's also one called point distance, where you just specify a distance. There we go. And it's just trying to find pieces that are that far apart and connect them. Okay. Now that's going obviously crazy quick. I'm going to grab that ball and just move the speed down to the end. And maybe I'll move it out front at the start of this. Obviously needs some tweaking. Move it too far out front. Well, you get the idea with that one, okay? So that's another one that you could tweak. Yes, sir. That's the dynamic part. So when you clicked on that Voronoi, under tags, under simulation, that's where you would choose a rigid body. Okay, and then when you hit play, it should just fall. Oh, because the ground is not also a collider body then. You did? I'll have to look then. Because when you hit play, it should just fall and break. A couple of things that might be causing that. So let's look at our motext. And I duplicated this from the previous one. If I set my object to not be a single object, that will change how it calculates all the stuff. So now instead of chunks, I have pieces. So that's always something to check, making sure that it's obviously a solid object. That should have been it. Yeah, I'll have to check, Nick. Okay, so that's again another way that you could animate your stuff, having it dynamics, having it kind of influence, or having something in there. Even if the ball isn't actually rendered out, if I click this bottom button here, it will not render the ball, it'll only show the animation. So I jump to my camera, I'll hit play. Cancel that for a second. I have to show up in motion blur for a minute. Oops. What do you mean? Just hiding it? Then it'll, if I click this, it'll actually get rid of the ball, and so the ball won't be part of the scene anymore. This bottom circle says don't render the ball. Still show it in the viewport, because I want to tweak it, but don't render it out. So you'll see it's not there. This one? Oh yeah, I could do that too, but that only is for display. It'll still render it. So if I turn this one off and turn this one like that, the ball is invisible here, but it still renders. Right, you can do that too. Yeah. It's all in what your own workflow is for that stuff, okay? Now you noticed, or maybe you noticed, when I rendered this, it said something about motion blur. Because this is dynamic, whenever we render something with motion blur, it doesn't just look at one frame, it looks at the frame before it and the frame after it. So when we render frame 42, it's looking at 41 and 43. So what happens is it goes to 42 and then goes back to 41 and then goes to 43. And then when it goes to the next frame to render, it goes to 42, it goes back to 41 and 44. So with dynamics, it freaks out, okay? So what I have to do is before I render anything dynamically, I have to go to Control D, there it is, go to Cache, and I have to say Bake. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to go through and it's going to lock in all my dynamic stuff. Okay? So now, if I were to hit play, it'll still work. There it is. And if I were to rewind it, it still rewinds. But now I have the ability to click and drag. Because that animation is locked in, it's going to update perfectly-ish. It doesn't always update perfectly. You can see right here, it kind of like pops in. Sometimes it does it. Yep, right there. So right there it didn't lock in totally because I missed that first frame of the dynamics of that. There we go. Okay, so as I slide back slowly, then it'll be fine. Okay, so now if I were to render this, I would actually get the motion blur on top of the dynamics, and then it would look even better because we have stuff moving. All right. It's not showing up there, I have to hit the other button. Okay, if I want to clear it, I want to make any changes, I hit Clear Cache. Now I rewind it, now I can make changes to my dynamics. Once you cache something and you've clicked that button to say Bake, it locks it in and it's permanent until you hit Clear. So if I bake it and then I change a bunch of stuff, none of those changes apply, okay? Because it's still basically reading it off of the disk. It saves it to the hard drive and it's reading that information off the hard drive. When I say Clear, it erases that and doesn't worry about it. All right, so there's another way. I'm going to show one more way, like I said, and this one's going to be on a new layer. Turn that off. Sign these. I'm going to go to this one and just duplicate it. And then remove that from the layer. Okay, and then, so you remember that one I did? That was like the first one I did. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to add another feature to it. Let me switch back to my attributes. I'm going to go to this purple one. No. There it is. Under MoGraph, I'm going to go to PolyFX. And I'm going to put the PolyFX underneath the MoText. And then what I should get is it should be breaking it up into pieces. Coordinates, one, transform. There it is. Okay, so now this is actually separating this into individual type pieces. The plane that I had before is affecting just the pieces of text. It's not affecting the individual slices that I just did. So I'm going to go to my MoText. I'm going to go to my letters and delete that plane. Then I'm going to go to my PolyFX, go to Effectors, and drop that plane into it. So now if I watch it, you'll see how it builds that word using all these slices. Now on the PolyFX, I also have that transform. I'll get rid of that. There we go. So now, as it comes in, it's building up this into little bitty slices. Now this is different than the Voronoi. The Voronoi is actually like breaking up into random chunks. This one, let me unlock my camera so we can see it, is just separating all the pieces. So every single one of these faces, it's pulling it off. So that as this comes in, you can see how it's putting all those faces back together again. Okay? So you might see as this is coming in, especially with the C, how it's breaking apart all of this stuff here, and then the A, all of that stuff. And then there's the M, we get these big shards. Okay? So with this one, with the PolyFX, it actually is a bit quicker to calculate because there's no dynamics here. It's just like a bunch of tiny pieces sliced up. Can be, again, a nice effect to use. I'm going to go to the PolyFX and go to the, I'm going to go to the MoText, go to the caps, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this up more. The more divisions I have, the more pieces I'll have. Okay, so as it comes in, you can see how we get these big slices. I probably don't want those big slices. I probably want like little slivers. Also, this big chunk right there, I don't want that to be a big chunk. I want it to be a piece. So I'm going to change how it's divided up. On the cap itself, I'm going to go down to the bottom where it says n-gon and change this to quadrangles, which just means make it quads, so divide it up more. If I say regular grid, now I get a lot more faces on that front, so that as it breaks it, you'll see that we don't have these huge chunks. Everything is a nice division of it. Okay? Now we still have these long pieces like on the A and the M that are going up. Okay, so that's not going to be on the cap because that's not part of the cap, that's part of the object. And that's going to be down here under intermediate points. I'm going to say subdivided, and there we go. So now it's broken up that area, if I fast forward, now it's broken up that area into a bunch of tiny pieces. Okay? I don't know why I'm just doing that to the C, probably because I had the C selected. I don't need to see the GUI. Yep. All right. Deselect the C, or I have to select all these. Because I had those selected before, apparently it wants me to select all those, then turn that off. There we go. And now as I tweak this number, nope, it's only affecting the one. It's weird. Natural. There we go. So that specific one, I guess it was just affecting the C because it probably had more more stuff on the C that could be adjusted versus the other ones. Yeah, if I keep tweaking this, maybe put it to 1 or something, or 20. Nope, it still just wants to affect that C. There we go. Okay, so now here this really comes into, this is basically the same effect I did before, except now it's broken up into little slices. We can play with things like, instead of just being a plane, I can go under a MoGraph, go to effectors, and one of the hard things is, let's say we have so many effects happening. We may have 30 things, and every time we create a new one, we have to then animate this whole set. So I'm going to just start grouping stuff together. So if I go to my MoGraph and create a group, I'm going to drop my plane into the group, and then on my my PolyFX, I'm going to delete the plane and just drop the group into that effector. So now as I take my group here and move the group, it'll move all of those pieces, or it should move all those pieces. Oh, there we go. I have to drop the plane into the group so it knows that it's part of it. And now as I grab the group and move it, it moves everything. If I want to add something else, I can just click on the group, click on, let's say, random, set the same settings I had on the other one, which was linear, and there we go. Make this a bit bigger. And now if this is inside that same group, now I can just grab that whole group and animate the group moving versus the individual pieces. And what that random does is it makes it look a lot better than just plain. Plain looks like it's assembling it. Might be something you're going after, but in this case I don't. This looks like 10 times better. Okay. I have also offset the random so that it's basically still random afterwards. Okay, if the random's on the other side of the plane, you'll see how it comes together. Like it's random, like way out in space, and then as it starts forming, it's basically like aligning it right here. Between these two yellow bars, that's where it's all like lined up. If the random is on the other side of this, you'll see how it's basically broken up in these like nice little areas until it puts itself back together. And I can go into that random and change a lot of stuff. So I can make the scale random. There we go. I can make the rotations random. And then now again, as it comes in, it's scaling it, rotating it, and putting it into the correct position. Okay, so there's another one that we could do, adding that to our list of items. You can also think about different ways to render these out. In the environment assignment, we went through and showed different camera techniques that we could use, right? So a depth of field was one of them. So this effect, it looks pretty cool. If our camera is like this, we don't have a whole lot of depth of field that we can play with, okay? For the assignment, it's perfect. It works out, everything is standard. But what if I took my camera and really got closer to this? Let me make a new camera. There it is. Okay, so I'm looking through that camera. I'm going to go into physical. I'm going to do my depth of field stuff. There it is. I'm going to go to focus distance and say right here. I'm going to go to my text animator 1, go to the group. Whoops. Go to the group. So I'm going to do something like that. Okay, let me set my focus distance again because I moved my camera to right there. Make sure depth of field is checked. I'm going to turn my settings down for now and not do an animation. I'm just going to do current frame. Yes, I don't have anything dynamic in this specific area, so I don't need to worry about that. So now what this should do, and I may need to adjust my settings just like we did before, is we should get some nice depth of field. Where I click that button, it should be pretty clear, and then it should drop off the focus in either direction. There we go. Oh, we also have motion blur on, so that's obviously going to be blurring these pieces coming in. Okay, so we don't see a whole lot of depth of field on this, so let's go to our physical. Take this down to, try 1. And just as I'm previewing this, I'm going to turn off motion blur. That way I can just focus on the one thing, like just depth of field. Okay, 0.2. There we go. So now we have a little bit of depth of field on this, and that looks a lot more impressive than just that, right? And then once we add in motion blur to this, definitely this is going to take longer to render. But keep in mind that if you start up class, you start that rendering, you go to another station, because obviously we have plenty, you could have another one that you're working on while this is rendering. So in that time, you're creating some really cool pieces. We don't always have that benefit. Or if you're at home working on this, you're leaving for the day, set it to render. Leave the house, do your stuff, and come back and check on it. I'm countlessly rendering stuff like at night I render, on the weekends I'll render. If we're going out to a movie, I'm like, cool, hold on, let me render something while we're going to the movie. And then I'll come back and then it's done. Or it's got 2 frames done. Okay? So again, you can see all the stuff that you can add to this to, again, make it look a lot better. Don't look at the assignments as, he just wants us to do this, boom, 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 there's 3 of them, I'm done. Look at all these pieces as ways that you can take something and get the skills for it that you could then make money doing this kind of thing. People pay for this kind of thing all the time.